We are to we are to cover lesson 6. I just won't talk loud. Lesson 6, developing the battle plan. Sounds like a title for some sort of Transformers movie or something. Bonnie has got so cold the last couple of days, she's leaving tomorrow for warmer weather. And we appreciate the good visit she's had and wish her safe travels. Baby Ezra is very happy tonight, so we're all going to be happy. I know I'm happy when he's happy. I thought I had the touch for calming him down, and I'm beginning to wonder. I may need more practice to get him to calm down. We did look into the wisdom literature last Lord's Day. Aaron went through probably 22, 25 verses or so from the book of Proverbs talking about what subject? What was he pointing at in all these verses, all these references? Planning. Someone said with a question on the end, planning. Planning is correct. We talked about planning. It seems rather obvious that planning is part of the wisdom literature. And if you believe the wisdom literature to be inspired, then one can conclude that God thinks planning is a good idea. Yeah, I think it's an inescapable conclusion. Where there is no vision, the people are unrestrained. I think King James said the people perish. I read, without proper vision, the people are out of control in one of the translations. I forget which one. The people run wild, one translate, or a couple of them actually said. Where there's no vision, the people run wild. Unrestrained, out of control, running wild. Does that sound like God's plan? Does that sound like God's intention for his people, for us to run wild? I think I said to my kids a few hundred times while they were growing up, this house is not a what? Gymnasium. This house is not a gymnasium. Allison didn't like roughhousing in the house. I didn't like running in the house. And so we don't go out of control, because that's when people bash their heads into fireplace fixtures and door beams and you name it. And I've also said today is not a good day to go to the emergency room. More than one time. And I meant it, because my mother threatened me with that. She said, the next time you split your head open or get a big wound, I'm not going to take you to the emergency room. I'm going to sew you up myself. And she did. So being out of control has its consequences, and they're not good ones. And that's not God's vision for his people. And this shouldn't be our vision either. As the shepherds have been talking, and we've got two new perspectives. Jeff and I, the old hats, got two new perspectives, bringing new ideas and new angles to see things. And from that, we're getting a greater appreciation for vision. Planning, forecasting, being intentional with the things that we're working on. And this lesson says you need to develop a battle plan. Otherwise, the people are running wild. The definition of insanity. Many of you have heard this, could probably say it. What is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome or different result. And that's, and again, there were enough voices that were saying something around that I know that's sort of common knowledge. Is that if we want things to change, then we're going to have to expect we got to change the way we behave. Do the same things the same way, you get the same outcome. I thought about this a little bit, and this idea of change and when that's bad and when that's good. Are we to be static or changing as a general rule, as a biblical principle? Static or changing? Changing, one voice said. Changing how? Changing? Okay, changing for the better. Working towards to be more like Christ. So there you have both the action word, we're going to change to be more like Christ. You could also use the word renew. While the outer man is perishing, the inward man is renewing when? Day by day. So that renewal is not a single action. That's not, oh, well, that's back when you accepted Christ and obeyed through water baptism. That's when you were renewed. Well, that's true. That's when you were reborn. But the inner man is to be renewed day by day. There's to be a constant change. There's to be intentional change. I read something 3 or 4 years ago, and I meant to hunt it up, and I may still do that here in the next day or two. I remember reading an article about sort of the modern Christian era, and there were observations of those both inside the Christian church collectively in the United States, and then sociologists outside of it. This article was trying to make the point, and I think they were successful, is that you have a lot of folks who like to heap upon themselves what we would call good old-fashioned preaching, which condemns immorality and supports morality. But their findings is that this teaching wasn't actually changing how people live. And that they were happy to talk about their love for, I love Jesus, Jesus is going to save me. They would talk and talk and talk about this, but as far as the practical application of the things that they heard, they were not willing to indoctrinate or incorporate these things, rather, into their lives, into their daily living, and make a change when it was necessary. Samantha's got a point. Or a question.
I want to go back to what you were saying about being renewed day by day. It's kind of a reminder that in order to be able to be renewed day by day requires constant self-examination, which can be very difficult because when you do that, you are pretty much always finding things that need to be worked on all the time.
That's true. And I think this lesson outline, this lesson 6, actually makes the point that before you're going to make any kind of visionary plan, you've got to evaluate where you are. Where are you now and what are you working towards? Part of that planning is we have to look sort of at our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I'm sure many of you have heard of SWOT analysis. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Where are you doing well? Where are you not doing well? We've talked about some of those things recently. Things that are going well, things that we do well as Christians, things that we do well as the body of Christ in 25th Street, and then the things that we don't do as well. What opportunities do we have to improve, and where are the threats to us making a change? Those threats are both internal and external. And we can see that we have to be cognizant, we have to be aware, we have to be watching and wary that these changes, or these threats rather, don't halt us when we're working at positive change. That verse came to mind about the inner person being renewed. Another word popped into my head because I think about food a lot, thanks to Jeff and others. It's not my fault. I think about food a lot. And has anyone ever heard of perpetual stew? Has anyone ever heard of that? It's a real thing. I'm not making this up. So perpetual stew has sort of become a trendy thing, and that's where you leave a stew pot on an open fire or a crock pot or something to where it's kept at temperature, it's kept up at heat all the time. And with a perpetual stew, and this is what they say developed mostly from the Middle Ages and the inns throughout Europe, where people would stop and they'd say, oh, I need a pot of porridge and a room for the night. Okay, well, they always had this pot over the flame. And whatever game they had, or whatever livestock that they had, or whatever produce was in season, they just throw it in this pot. But they never emptied the pot out. They just kept dipping out of it and serving out of it, but constantly new ingredients were being thrown in the pot, and they would, I don't think they referred to it back in those days, but it's now called perpetual stew. And there are people who go, I've had one of these going now for 6 months. I've had one of these going for a year. I actually looked up, is this safe to eat? And there were those who claim, I didn't consult with my local nutritionist, but there are those that claim as long as you keep the entire pot up to 140 degrees or higher, have it all brought to a boil at least at one point, as long as you can maintain 140 degrees, it's not going to encourage bacteria growth. So that this thing is safe to eat on. Now, what happens with the perpetual stew? How old are the potatoes in the perpetual stew? Are they a week old? Are they 6 months old? Are they a year old? As you dip out of the pot, it's a perpetual stew. You're constantly putting new inputs in, and then you're constantly giving out the contents of the stew, so that over time, presumably when there's enough foot traffic at your kettle, your stew is not going to go bad because you're constantly renewing the ingredients. And you don't have any old, slimy, disgusting vegetables floating around in it, because you just keep eating out of it and you keep changing. And they said the flavors were basically soup of the day was whatever they threw in last night. It was soup of the day. It didn't matter. It's just you kept this thing on a basically a hearth, an open flame. And I thought a Christian's life is a perpetual stew. You got to keep the heat on constantly. You've got to always be processing new inputs, and you've got to be generous with the contents. If you can keep the heat on, and if you can process new inputs, and you can be generous with the outflowing, a Christian's life can be as tasty as the perpetual stew. Now, maybe you don't hear tasty when you hear that. My kind of thinking is, I want to do a perpetual stew, but you can't do a perpetual stew for a few. You got to have a lot of people. And I think that generosity, that outpouring of this contents under heat, is what makes it a good analogy. For someone who is constantly being renewed, being refreshed, having good outcomes, because the heat is always there. There's always an interest in reinventing oneself, like the perpetual stew does. There was an account here in the first page of the congregation that had, let's ask this preacher to try out. And it's got that in quotations because that's one of those phrases I actually hate to even hear used. It's not a tryout. This is not a slot in the Olympic Games. But anyway, they talk about having a tryout. And so the candidate said, well, what are you looking for in a preacher? They said, well, we don't know. And then the preacher said, well, what are your plans for the next 5 years for the congregation? They said, well, I guess we're just going to keep doing what we've been doing. We really haven't thought about anything like that. How eager do you think that preacher was to join that work? They didn't know where they were going. They didn't know why they were going, and they didn't even understand or have an appreciation for the fact that they were losing membership. They'd had to let go a preacher because of dissatisfaction, and it sounds like the shepherds dissolved in the course of whatever time frame this. I don't know if this is a hyperbole. I don't know if this is a made-up example or a real example. But either way you look at it, that's insanity. That's doing the same old thing and expecting a different outcome. We're just going to let random chance come to play. We don't know where we're heading. How do you walk a path when you don't know the way? Even GPS gives you the next turn. Turn here, even if you don't know the road. Being adrift versus being anchored. We are to be people who are anchored in our faith rather than adrift. We don't know where we're going. We don't know when we get there. And if we're just going to ride the wave, we're just going to be, well, we haven't thought about it, we haven't really got any plans, then that's just kind of being adrift. Look over at Hebrews chapter 6. Hebrews chapter 6. Verses 19 and 20. This hope we have as an anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and steadfast, and one which enters within the veil, where Christ has entered, where Jesus has entered as a forerunner for us, having become a high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. Our anchor in this case is in it's in laying hold, verse 18, of the hope that's been set before us. And this hope is an anchor. We're not adrift because we do have someplace we're going. We do have a vision of how to get there. We do have a mission that needs to be fulfilled if we are to have our hope established in God's saving grace. And it doesn't just happen by circumstance or because you go to the right church or because your family has been a member of the church for 4 generations or however many. That's not how that happens. It says that we have a hope that is sure and steadfast. And that hope, you could just insert the word vision in there and it'd still work pretty close to the same. A hope is an expectation based upon evidences. It's an expectation based upon evidences. It's not fully revealed, but you have enough to tell you what you can expect. Just thinking in terms of examples. I was driving around today and I heard this horrible rumbling noise. And then I just started looking for the big truck because I drive a little car. And sure enough, in my blind spot was an 18-wheeler. But I had a hope that it wasn't going to crush me, run over me. I needed to locate it and I needed to see it. But I had enough evidence to know it was there. And that creates the anchor or the stability. But it's having the vision. It's seeing something that could be a potential and then working to fulfill that potential. So I'm going to jump into the lesson outline a little bit more here. Any comments or thoughts on sort of the introductory material you'd like to add? So this is an example, I guess you'd say, or a model of a 5-year plan. I'm going to ask, does anyone think that a 5-year plan is biting off more than one can chew? Or should it be a 10-year plan, or should it be a 20-year plan? Why 5-year plan? Is there any good reason? Is there any bad reason? Okay. It's not so close that you're not just living the present. A 5-year plan gives you an opportunity to, again, have a vision, see ways to fulfill that. But human nature and just the reality of the world, it's really, the more you forecast out in the future, any plan, whatever it is, the less likely you are to have any influence on the outcome. And I won't say control the outcome, but I'll say influence the outcome. Because another axiom in my life is the sooner you learn that you're not in charge of your own life, the better off you are. But we can influence things. And if you're trying to forecast 15, 20 years, I mean, I don't know. In 20 years, I'm 80. I don't know that I could really make a lot of firm plans for 20 years. And 5 may be a little rosy just to think of the work necessary to complete that. But I think the thought is when you get too far out, the plans become too vague. They become too many, there's too many variables at play to have any idea as to whether that plan is actually anything you can fulfill or not. And I say this as a model plan. The first time I read through the model, I just wanted to get a picture of it, so I just read the 5 bullet points here. Year 1 is to prepare the plan. Year 2, study the basics. Year 3, apply the basics to our lives. Year 4, share the basics with others. Year 5, move to the meat of the word. And when I read this, I thought, well, that's an admirable plan. There is nothing wrong with this plan. That is not the plan I would make. But there's nothing wrong with this plan. I think it could. I think Aaron alluded to this the other day. He said a whole year in planning. He said I don't like to plan that long, and I think he's right. And the reason I say that is because we're not a startup. This isn't a brand new entity. The family of God's been around a long time. And it's kind of like that perpetual stew. We got some ingredients here that have been simmering for a long time, and we've got some that are newer to the pot. But as you consider in whole, we've got a wide range of experiences and expertise that starting with a whole year to plan and then a whole year on the basics may be too rudimentary. But I will say this, though, for a fact. Better this plan being too rudimentary than no plan at all. Better to aim low and then overperform than to have no plan at all. We just can't keep stumbling through life and think the right things are going to happen in our lives without making an effort for them to be accomplished. And that's the whole point of the plan. And plans are not chiseled in stone. I mean, the only document I know for a fact from the Bible that was chiseled in stone was smashed after it was chiseled in stone. Now, it was rewritten the same as it had been before, but the point is, even a well-crafted and well-considered plan has to have room for changes. So even with a 5-year plan, you could say by year 3, we need to scrap this and we need to try this instead, and this has come up that we didn't anticipate, so we're going to deal with it. And there's nothing wrong with that either. That's prudent to be able to adjust your plan according to changes in inputs. Things aren't going to be what we thought they were going to be, and it's time to adjust the model. But as it is on the paper, if we just kind of put our name here at the top, 25th Street Church, and said this is our plan, we could work this plan. And you know what this plan would have us doing? By year 4, it'd have us sharing with others. By year 5, we'd begin in the meat of the word. And with no plan at all, some of us are never going to get to year 4 and 5, ever. With no plan at all, some of us get there in year 1. But without a concerted effort to work together, to be equipped, and to be consistent, and to be well encouraged to work the plan and plan the work, it's better than no plan at all by a long shot. By a long shot. So we've bandied about some plans already, and the planning is not a 3-week operation either, is it? It takes some real thought, and it takes some conversation, and it takes some compromise. Well, I'd like to see this in the plan. I don't think we're quite ready for that. That's not a bad idea, but let's make that a year 4 item instead of a year 2 item. Okay, I can work with that, but can you give me that for year 3 in exchange? Yeah, we could probably do that. I think another element of the plan that I'm sure we'll cover in more detail as we move through the book is that with every plan, I think I'm pretty sure what Aaron was doing with all of those Proverbs readings back last Lord's Day is what I hear often referred to as buy-in to the plan. When the plan comes down from on high in any organization, when the plan is a dictate from the masters in their fine offices and with their private parking places, what do the peons do that are expected to execute the plan? Well, I don't remember them asking me about that. And that's not going to work because of this. And well, why weren't we consulted in this? And they forgot to consider this over here. We've got all this work we're already doing. Who's going to do all that work when we got this new work to do? I've heard this. I've been in organizations where that's exactly what the conversation is. How many people are we going to have to hire to do the new plan because we can't stop doing what we've been doing? Oh, yeah? You can find out a lot of organizations do a lot of things that just don't need to be done. And the focus and the emphasis can be put on those things that are more productive, those things that are more profitable, those things that draw more interest to the business, increase foot traffic in the store, fill in the blank, whatever you think it is, raise production values, lower scrap rates. You can just keep going on and on. There's lots of things that every organization ends up doing because they have the remnants of the last plan that have kind of gone off the rails, and they kept some of the old plan, but they didn't execute all the old plan. So they're doing some things that are just kind of ridiculous. And no one seems to really catch on to often except the people that are out there going, why am I doing this every day? This is ridiculous. How come those muckety mucks didn't see how silly my job description is? I think our job description is pretty well documented. It's more a matter of appreciating what it is and understanding. And I hope you understand, when I'm saying job, I'm not talking about a drudgery task. And I'm talking about the opportunity of a Christian to have an impact on the lives of other people. Because that's work. Anytime work's involved and there are people involved, I call that a job. We've got a job to do. People say, well, what's your job? I say, do you want to know my paying ones or my not paying ones? Right? Because we have lots of jobs that, or maybe the pay is in a little different form than cash money. There's things that we do because of the pleasure they bring us, because of the rewarding, the fact that we're rewarded in emotional ways, in spiritual ways. And so we do things that are not compensated with money, but they're certainly our job because we have the opportunity and we have the ability, therefore we have the responsibility. And a 5-year plan is an attempt to help each of us find our place in the scheme of what we're trying to do together. And there are different talents, and there are different levels of skill, and there are different opportunities. There's just different physical abilities. My kids were always just shocked. We would do things like seal the parking lot. And they say, well, there's Jerry DeRake and Gail out here sealing the parking lot. Where's all the young people at? How come they're the ones doing it? Was that really in their job description? Herman Deckard. It's amazing what we can do with our bodies when we set our minds to it and what people are willing to do. But even at that, there are abilities that wane. There are skills that are not as sharp as they once were. But that doesn't mean the job's over. There's still a role somewhere somewhere in a successful plan. And I think as shepherds, I think what we have really fallen down on, this is true confession time. I think one of the areas where we really fall down, we can talk about what is truth and what is being taught in the church. And we can say, that is of the scriptures and that is of error, and we can reason that through with the scriptures and we can understand that. But I think where we have really fallen down as shepherds is helping each and every one find the role within the church. Because everyone has a role. And I think we've become very accustomed to, we'll lay the opportunities out, and you can pick from the list, and you can do where your strengths are, and that's wonderful, that's good. But if there are some that are just never picking off the list, it's been our tendency in the past to say, well, I wish they would get more involved. And wishes aren't part of strategic plans. Wishes are not in a 5-year strategic plan. They never sit down and write a document and say, I wish the following would happen. Or I wish the following people would step up and do their job. That word never appears in a strategic plan. And that makes us uncomfortable when people have expectations of us. And that's a big part of why we avoid that. And I don't want to presume what your strengths and weaknesses are. But some of you I know well enough to know where your strengths are. I may know where your hesitations are too. I mean, it wasn't very long ago, there was a young man sitting in the group right here who said, well, I've never preached before. It's like, well, you better get busy. Because I know his potential and I know what he's doing in terms of developing fruitful lessons and sharing them with other people. But he had to be kind of nudged a little bit, not too hard. It wasn't that difficult to nudge him into it. And we can nudge each other a little harder, I think, and get away with it. Do you agree with that? Disagree? Do you want to be nudged? Some people really want a little more management than others. I've had employees that were like, well, just tell me what to do every step and I'll do it. And I'm like, I prefer you figure this out on your own, because you'll come up with a more efficient way than I have and how this is to be performed. But some folks just want that list, and maybe we need to do a better job of just making the list. And here's your list. Here's what you're good at, and here's what you're going to be responsible for. Man.
Yes. So you asked the question of, should you want to be nudged or whatever it was you asked, and I said, well, my comment was, I hope so. And the reason I say that is because I think sometimes, maybe many times, people see something that we are good at or could be good at that we might not think we're any good at. Mm-hmm. And so if we don't think we're any good at something, we're obviously not going to do it. But if somebody encourages you in the right direction and somebody believes in you more than you believe in yourself, then I think there's a much higher chance of you trying something that you never did before. And I've talked to people before who've done this. They've tried something, didn't think they were going to like it, and it turns out they really liked it. They were really glad that somebody encouraged them in that direction. So I think we should want to. Of course, it's going to require us to get out of our comfort zone and to do something that we're not used to. And it's going to be uncomfortable at first. But I think, as you get more and more encouragement from people, then hopefully that will encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. I mean, I think of Roger, and he's told me that when he was asked to write his Jumpstart articles, he's only to, I think, the people at his congregation, if I remember him telling me this correctly, and now there's people reading it all over the place. He's told me, he said, I never thought that it would turn into something like this, but it took encouragement from his elders to start writing those articles, and I don't think he would have started writing them if he hadn't been encouraged in that direction.
I think when I talk about nudging, that's kind of a tongue-in-cheek word. You can ask someone to do something with a baseball bat behind your back, and you can say please 3 times, and then the bat comes out, and it's not really what we're talking about. And I've said before too that I struggle with the idea that if Christ hanging on a cross and dying in my place is not enough motivation for me to get excited about the work of the church, then how's some elder or some deacon or some member going to talk me into that? And I kind of struggle with that, because I think what more can be done? But that's not the first century church model. There was a lot of encouragement that was delivered to the churches. Churches that were committed to the message of Christ and his death and resurrection, and they believed they were saved by the blood of Christ through grace, and they were motivated to stand firm on that foundation. And still, the writers and the apostles would say, I exhort you, I encourage you, I appeal to you, brethren, this, and this. And again, it's personality types. They're all different. And some people really thrive on that kind of personal attention as far as encouragement goes. And others are kind of like, oh yeah, I'm good. I'm getting it done. I'm doing it. You don't have to worry about me. You don't have to give me much attaboys. Other people want that, though. And it's just part of human nature. But as far as developing a plan, probably getting ahead as far as actually, executing the plan is kind of what I'm talking about a little bit. But as far as developing the plan, I think there were some fundamentals that were mentioned here in the outline. Particularly in years 1 and 2, where you sort of develop the plan and study the basics. Well, what kind of elementary basics are we talking about? And the outline goes through things like, well, just the authority of God. That's a basic, that's a fundamental. And it seems like there must be a lot of people that don't understand that fundamental principle of God. God gets to say what he wants. And it gets to be his word that is powerful, and his word that is supreme. That the word became flesh, that Jesus came to the earth and spoke the words of his Father. And he said, I am not giving of my own testimony, but the Father has given me signs and wonders as a sign that I am speaking on his behalf. The basics of the very deity of Jesus, and how can you dispute that? And yet that's been disputed for centuries and centuries. And it's still not a settled matter in a lot of people's eyes. The gift of prophecy and the things that fold into the new covenant that were all so that the forerunner would be a foreshadowing. And we could see basic principles and understand themes that God had developed over the centuries in his interaction with mankind. These things are basic. The prophecies, wow. I tell you, probably a bad habit. You spend any time online reading comment sections to about anything these days, and you can find out there's a lot of people that really have a poor appreciation for prophetic utterance, and they want to use it to dictate things of the 21st century for which there's no rhyme or reason. There's no reference. There's nothing that ties it all together. The themes that God has established that are tied together in his word are often the things where Jesus either said, I do this to fulfill the purpose for which my Father sent me, or the writer says, this was done in order to fulfill that which someone said. I wouldn't even piece some of these things together. But in hindsight, you can look at that and go, oh, I get that. Prophecy is more for establishing today than it is forecasting some kind of far future. Most of it is. I'm not saying everything's been fulfilled in Scripture, but a lot of it has been to establish that which is of the final dispensation, the final law of God, law of liberty, the law of grace. And we've seen these things come to fruition. Did you go through the questions for outline 6, chapter 6? You have any questions you'd like to cover or talk about a while? Do you think vision is important? Some people are more naturally short-sighted than others. I've read a lot of things in regard to sociology. It's kind of the study of man. Generally speaking, if someone has has lived a very poor lifestyle, doesn't have a lot of money, and has poor health, if you have those two factors, it's very difficult to have a vision that's beyond the very short term, mere hours or days. Whereas if you have good health and you got significant financial resources, you tend to make plans for next year and 2 years from now and when I retire. But if you live in an area with a lot of violence and a lot of poverty and a lot of ill health, your friends may not live to be 21 very often, or 40, or 50. And you develop a very short-sighted view. And we come from different backgrounds, and we've got that propensity to not have vision. But is vision important? Or should we just keep sort of feeling our way around? Samantha says we don't want to do that. Again, any of these questions you'd like to look at? Yes, sir. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just so encouraged by the attitude of the congregation, the family here, in wanting to implement a vision. So we've got this started.
Mm-hmm.
We just need to continue it.
I would agree. I think we've had seeds of this from our last time of transition, which is often when plans get written. That's human nature too. But things are beginning to gel. The more we talk and the more we've had feedback from everyone, to where we can start putting some things down on paper. Hopefully sooner than later. Like, I think we're on for tomorrow, aren't we? It is. I hope we see this exciting. I hope we see this as a time for personal growth. But isn't personal growth so much more fun when you can also see the growth in others? Is fun the right word? It's exciting. It stimulates one another to love and good works when we're all working together. And I think it is exciting, and I think it's a shame to me that I haven't seen how to do this kind of vision before and feel like, maybe it's had to grow up a little bit. But I'm 60 this week, so I'm there. And so I'm ready to start taking more of the reins and putting things down and making plans happen. And I know Jeff is, and I know Aaron is, and I know Brace is, and I know you are too. This is an exciting time for us. And I think we can sense it, that there's a renewed positive outlook on who we can be and what we can be in Columbus. We don't have to change our faith to do this. We don't have to change any principles to do this. We can just do this while retaining all of the things that are foundational for us and where our convictions are. 100%. I think the bell rang, didn't it? All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.